Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best, worst, and middest of comic books, graphic novels, and sometimes mangas. I'm your host, the soon-to-be-known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my botanical co-host, it's Jamie.
Hello there, how are you?
I'm, think a little better, better than...
So you're faring a bit better than me, are you?
Shall we address the elephant in the room before we get started?
I think we should. I have 3 updates.
3 updates?
I have 3 updates.
That's one more than I was expecting.
It is one more than you were expecting because I remembered one.
Ah, fantastic.
The first update, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
I done fucked up.
Right.
I messed my queens up. We have had a message from our resident historical consultant.
I say, better leave the big words for me this episode.
Absolutely. We have had a message from our resident historical consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like a classic Jamie recap, or would you like me to just quote what he said?
So the problem is they could be wildly different interpretations. So let's start with the Jamie recap, and then we'll see if it makes sense or not.
I done fucked my queens up.
Okay.
In the last episode, it was quite a history-heavy episode. I got this... I mean, we are recording on the day that the last episode came out.
Yep.
I got a message at 8:27 this morning from the historical consultant. He does have my phone number now. He's very useful.
Right.
It said, already listening to the new podcast. 8:42. Just turned off the podcast as I got to work. But I didn't just hear you say Elizabeth is Catholic. She was fucking proddy as the day is long. Mary was the Catholic. Elizabeth had Catholics burned at the stake. Mate, you have got to start calling me to check some facts at this point.
I think at this point it's very obvious that the historical correspondent of the podcast is a close friend, because it wouldn't be a stranger off the internet would be as
No, he's just a listener.
Just a random listener.
He's just a random listener.
You definitely did not know beforehand.
Definitely didn't know him beforehand. No. He's a random listener. He's a fan of the podcast. He likes Comic Literate so much that he listens to it on the tram on the way to his job in London.
Right.
And he spots our historical errors and he helps us correct them. And he's very kind in doing so. We don't pay him.
He is, regardless of what I've said, he is very kind in doing so. He's putting in the effort that he didn't need to. And
Absolutely.
we appreciate that.
Second update. We have a musical intro.
We do, yes, we do. It's started at the beginning of this episode.
Yep, fantastic.
We haven't heard it added to the episode yet because of the weird scheduling of how we record it and stuff.
But now that I've said it, you have to put it in.
It's going to be post-added to this episode.
I'm quite invested in you guys liking this for one particular reason that I'll let Ryan tell you.
That Jamie wrote it.
And recorded it.
Yes.
We did it together. I'm not a very good music producer. Ryan's never recorded music before. So we had a go, and I quite like it. I
think it's punchy. I think it's got that energy that we deliver.
I think it does.
I think it represents our punk rock comic book assessments.
It's like a garage rock comic book intro. I'm here for it. The third update, and this is probably the update I should have given first,
kind of informs the previous 2.
I'm a bit drunk.
Yes.
I have a part-time job in a pub. We had a team meeting. Apparently, team meetings in a pub turn into everyone sitting around and drinking together.
I could have told you that, but...
Well, do you know what, Ryan? I've done quite professional jobs for a long time. I've not had to work in a pub since I was a student. That was an awfully long time ago. I wasn't aware. Things have happened. We're moving on.
We're moving past it. And the temptation was to not mention it and see if anyone noticed. But probably better to cards on the table, be like, this is why it is.
I couldn't have handled nobody noticing it. I detest the idea that sober Jamie is just as erratic as drunk Jamie.
I mean, we will find out.
We had a discussion off air, humble listener, about whether or not I kept drinking throughout the podcast to maintain a level.
I was against the idea.
Understandably, I was for it.
Yeah, in this state. And for any of our non-British listeners, and I don't know how much this spreads past our humble isle or not, but accidentally getting drunk on a weekday is a staple of British living.
Yeah, I'm not the only person who's ever done that.
No, it's...
And I do work in a pub.
Yes.
It happens from time to time.
Yes, and it's interesting because I've listened to a podcast recently over the Christmas time. A lot of podcasts done by bigger groups were having their Christmas parties.
Yeah.
One of them I listened to was, they do a daily review of wrestling, and one of them, the intro was them recording in a club at 1 a.m. doing the intro and getting a guy who was in the business but was not a wrestling fan to be like, just say this bit, it'll be funny because it's a joke we do. Just say this bit where we come to you.
Was it not a joke they do?
It is a joke, but the way he did it made it sound like it wasn't. Done before.
That's so good.
But then it cuts to, it's literally for the first like 5 minutes, and then it cuts to them hungover the next morning doing the actual like episode.
So the historical consultant, who is not a friend of mine.
Right, yep, absolutely.
Not a friend of mine.
Of course.
Is probably going to come visit me at some point before the spring. Because we visit each other since he became the historical correspondent.
Yeah.
We've visited each other semi-regularly. When he comes down, I think we should have a comic literate Christmas party.
I mean, I'd love to just have him on the episode.
Well, he's never met you.
Right, yep.
I don't think you've met our historical consultant.
Our correspondent.
And so it would be really because he listens to us he listens to us once a week on his 2 tube journeys.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on the show.
And so it'd be great because you've met other people that I have become friends with because of the podcast who listen.
Speaking of running jokes in podcasts, but go on.
And they've met you and been like, oh, you must be Ryan because I recognise your voice from the podcast,
The voice is very recognisable, I've been told.
So back to the comic.
Or starting with the comic.
I got to do it.
But is it technically back to if we haven't started on it yet?
Look, yeah.
I'm just throwing in
I'm in no fit state for you to start on me.
I'm throwing in the podcast jokes. The long-running ones. Actually.
Alan Moore? I don't know.
Actually is one we should get on a shirt. And it should be me pushing up my glasses saying with that spelling AKSHUL,
If you would buy actually with an illustration of something pretending to be Ryan pushing up a pair of glasses on a shirt.
Or if we get like a copyright-free nerd, like a stereotypical nerd with the glasses.
Right.
With the bandage over the middle.
If you would buy that on a t-shirt, leave us a 5-star review that just says cunt.
Or actually, I think that'll pit.
Cunt is funnier.
Because otherwise we will go through them and be like, hey, what are these messages for?
All of these YouTube comments that just say cunt.
And to be fair, one of the shorts did have a comment, which I was going to bring up to you. I forgot to mention.
Well, let's do it now.
One of the shorts, it was about the people who hired by Disney who had previous criminal convictions.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm almost certain that these are the only 2. And it was Robert Downey Jr. and Tim Allen.
Yeah.
And I say that in the thing. I'm like, I don't know if this is true, but I'm pretty sure this. And I tried to research it for all of about 10 to 15 minutes, and I could not find anything. All I could find was
more research than you've ever done for this podcast.
Exactly. Right? All I could find was like ex-Disney club, kid stars who had gone on to do shit, but none who had already been convicted and then been hired.
I know a Disney cruise guy.
Yeah, I've met him actually.
He's nice.
He's nice.
He listens.
So
hey mate,
did this short, and there were 2 comments on the short because the shorts rarely get comments, understandably. But there was 2 comments on the short. One was a guy going, "Hang on, so you don't actually know this, and yet you're reporting on it as if you do."
Were they American? That sounds like an American.
I've no idea, but it's just the idea that they were like, I get my news from you guys, and now you tell me you don't research it?
If anybody is getting their news from us, please, while you're listening to this episode, just log on to BBC News for fuck's sake.
Or any actual news for that matter.
Yeah.
And the
Guardian charges, you know.
Yeah. The funny thing was the second comment, and the only other comment on the video just said, gay.
What?
Just said gay.
I should read our comments more often because they're always a gold mine.
And the instinct is to take it initially as an accusation or a name calling or that kind of one.
Yeah.
But also the way it's read, like tone does not convey well through
gay?
Or it could have just been gay. Just like not even like accusatory, just saying gay.
If you were the person who left a comment saying gay,
leave another gay with an exclamation mark or with a question mark or
explain
something.
Yourself. Yeah. Like, I want to know. I need to know what the context was.
And the funny thing is that if you go on like a YouTube studio screen or whatever, it shows like the latest comments. So for ages, whenever I logged in, it was the top one on there, and it just every time I logged in, gay, just gay.
That's so good. I know. How long has this been going on for?
I mean, it happened once ages ago, and I just forgot to mention it.
But every time since.
I mean, for a while we've had some since, so that's pushed. It then pushed them down.
Please leave us more comments.
And if they could be as funny as just the word gay, then fantastic.
Okay, we should probably get this ball rolling.
Because the temptation to be like, but it's like, don't start internet discourse with a
You know
YouTube
I'm going to
comment.
log in from my private YouTube account and just go at it.
But to what end? Like, what are we achieving here?
Yeah, you don't feed the troll.
Exactly.
It's a well-known fact.
If the trolls are just going to be funny by themselves, just let them. Like, it's like
the Nazi guy.
Oh.
Remember the Nazi guy?
Yeah, what was his comment? It was
technically the Nazi
National
post was
Socialists.
socialists.
Yeah, again, commenting on this news reporting of
About
Superman's
a comic book
dad.
from a fucking Alan Moore comic book from 85.
On Superman's dad. That was the top story of the day, and he needed to weigh in on it.
Fuck me.
So, we've had our preamble, and now we'll start diving into the comic. And as you see from the title, we are covering the Poison Ivy solo series from DC.
Are we starting with the arting?
We will. I've just got the little bit of preamble.
I'm so glad you're here for structure today, bud.
I mean, you could say that every episode, but even more so now than ever. So the Poison Ivy comic is I think it's the first longer solo series of the character.
Yeah.
So speaking of retcons or corrections from the previous episode, I said about Neil Gaiman not having done any Marvel or DC before he did 1602. Turned out he did do a little bit. He was doing a little bit of stuff.
And he'd done some Poison Ivy.
He actually did Poison Ivy's origin back in like 88. It was like a one issue.
Well, let's cut this shit off now.
Go read it and come back.
Yeah, that's way more interesting.
We can come back to it.
But that's always bad soup.
What, to come back to something?
Yeah, we've established this.
Then we will strengthen our skills as podcasters and learn how to do it effectively.
I have no soft skills as a podcaster.
Well, we grow. This is how we as you've mentioned. So, back to the structure. So, Poison Ivy, she had a few solo things, a couple of miniseries. This is the first kind of ongoing one. It was written by G. Willow Wilson. Now, we have read something by her already. Do you remember what it is?
No.
It was the original Ms. Marvel run. So she kind of co-created, kind of mainly created the Ms. Marvel character.
When you say the original, do you mean the Kamala Khan
Kamala
one?
Khan, Ms. Marvel, yeah.
Whoa, shit.
Yeah, so she's that writer, now doing this Poison Ivy run, with the art primarily, as it says here, by Marcio Takara. And it was, what I found interesting was it was originally intended to be a mini-series, but then at the last wire expanded into an ongoing thing. So it's now run for like over a year or so and will apparently go on for a while. I feel like this, I've read past what we've done. So we're covering issues 1 to 6 here. It's the first volume of this run from 2022.
And admittedly, I did wonder, because issue 6 feels like a pretty final resolution.
It's the end of a volume, so that's not uncommon in ongoing series. But where it goes after that, it feels slightly less focused than what we've read here. So in the one hand, I was glad for us to do just this first volume.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I feel like it would have been better as a isolated miniseries, maybe even just these 6 issues, or maybe a bit longer. Yeah. But I thought it was interesting to anyone who reads it. You kind of see where we're coming from here. So starting with the arting, as we've got the details out.
Starting with the arting.
How did you feel about the art?
Dude, there's jank.
There is jank. I do, but there's also a lot of great stuff as well.
So there was this one splash panel in issue 1 that I really liked, which was them establishing the camper van. They established a camper van with the splash panel, which I liked. But just to be clear that we're looking at the same jank here.
I've also got a picture of jank, so...
Jank.
Yeah. I've got this one.
Jank.
So I will say...
Jank!
There is a bit, but there are also a lot of pages with good facial expressions as well.
I definitely think the way they dealt with issue 6... like, a lot of the art in issue 6 is fantastic.
I would say across all the 6, a lot of the hallucination stuff is pretty great. And also a lot of the smaller bits as well.
I really loved Harlequin's alternate costume. So when she's not full Harley Quinn in issue 1, but then in issue 2, when she's hallucinating and she sees her and she's in the droopy hat thing, I think she looked fantastic. And I think they did a really great job of styling out all the botanical stuff.
Yep.
Which obviously is a Poison Ivy. I mean, I know nothing about Poison Ivy, so it might be interesting here for you to give me the context, because I thought Poison Ivy was a lady who had whips.
Yeah, I think you're only getting confused there with like vines that move by themselves. So,
But I thought her powers were like whippy vines, not poisoning people with mushrooms.
so the mushrooms is a unique thing to this story.
Right.
So,
Okay. So I'm not completely on the wrong fucking
yeah,
trail.
and
here.
I'm gonna explain kind of where I think you got that from, because I say you're not far off. I think it's the passing glances of a character rather than knowing like the specifics. So I'll give you a little backstory. Poison Ivy, if anyone doesn't know, she is part of Batman's Rogue Gallery.
That's his villains, right?
Yes, the Rogue Gallery is normally a hero's Rogue Gallery of villains.
How have I gotten to this point making a comic book podcast and not known that term?
It's not an obvious term, to be fair. Like,
Well, it's a nice expression though.
yeah, and she's one of the kind of most well-known ones. I think most like people who don't read comics will know her from the George Clooney Batman film, where she was played by the same one who played Uma Thurman, Kill Bill.
Uma Thurman's fucking great.
Yes,
Fantastic actor.
she did a very hammy, chewing the scenery kind of performance, which was what the film asked for in that role. She was the one who's like I'm a lover, not a fighter. Like I make my goons do that, or plant-based puns. It's the same one with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, so he was doing all the ice-based puns as well. So most people know her from that. Her general thing as a villain is she's one of the more interesting Batman villains. He has a few like this where they have some motivations that make her a bit more sympathetic. So her thing is she is very much a plant-based villain in the sense that
like
as opposed to plant-based meat, yeah.
Like every vegan.
Yes.
Oh, that's another plant-based villain who's come in.
And that's actually an interesting point that we're going to get to later as well.
Well, the ecological stuff is actually quite on the nose and quite interesting. When did this come out?
2022, so very recently.
Yeah. So within the current kind of cultural climate.
Yes. And there's a lot of that, which we'll be getting into. So she is, the general backstory is that she was either experimented on or she was a scientist. She was a scientist in every iteration, or she experimented on herself, depending on the iteration.
Yeah.
But she gains these plant powers. It's kind of a plant psychicness. So she connects with the plant, can control them with her mind and stuff like that. She also can excrete like pheromones and stuff, and her own body is quite altered as well. So like in this prime example, she has a healing factor, which comes up quite a bit. She can release pheromones. Her big thing she's known for as a Batman villain, like more back in the day, is that she would excrete pheromones that would make people, and mostly men, but sometimes women as well, basically fall in love with her. So she would then like mind control them in that way.
Catwoman or her that Batman has like a romantic story?
Catwoman.
So it's not her.
No, okay. But she's had the whole like. Without knowing it for certain, she's absolutely had that scenario where she's made Batman fall in love with her, and he's had to like resist and break free. That kind of, she's very much a comic book femme fatale in like the very literal thing of her powers. If that makes sense.
They're thinking of Alfred.
Yeah, think of England.
Think of England, baby.
So that's her general backstory with regards to this specifically. Oh, and her motivations. She's always been an ecological kind of terrorist in a way. Like her whole thing is to basically do things that will make the plants thrive and the humans either die or like anything to reset like the balance of Mother Nature, that kind of stuff.
And I feel like that, I mean, this might just be because of Thanos, but I feel like this idea of redressing the balance and curbing humanity for the benefit of the planet or the ecology is actually a reoccurrent theme in comic books at the moment.
Definitely. I think she's one of the older original ones to be doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I imagine ecological concerns were much less prevalent in the general psyche 20 years ago, I
think a big influence of this comic, especially, probably on the writer, is back in the day before climate change was a bigger topic as it is now.
Yeah.
Back then it was just people like, I suppose it would be good if more trees grew and stuff, but also maybe don't destroy the city so the plants can overrun it, like that kind of attitude.
Yeah, totally.
But as climate change has become more of a mainstream awareness of in the general public, I think she has naturally become a bit more sympathetic. It's kind of like, oh, she was talking about this from the start. Like, even if she was being evil about it, like,
I read her as quite a sympathetic character.
Exactly. That's why I think she's kind of turned into this kind of anti-hero character. But yeah, originally it was like, I'm going to destroy Gotham so that the plants can take over as villains.
Gotham?
I mean, she's a Batman villain. So.
Why not Tokyo or New York?
She lives in Gotham. Start at your hometown.
What's the population of Gotham?
It's meant to be like a New York or Chicago, like a big city.
Big city.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so she's...
But we've established you can't even get car insurance there. I don't know why anyone lives there.
Well, apparently you must be able to get car insurance there because people have it.
In fairness, Americans aren't a big fan of car insurance, are they, in general?
Yeah, well, they don't need it like we do. Like, we are required by law to have it here. So I think that's the difference.
If you're going to drive a car, you need to insure that shit.
Yeah. So, yeah, Ivy is an interesting character, especially one at this point to delve into her motivations and kind of realign her as a character. I like that in the beginning she is quite bold-faced, still a evil person.
Yeah.
That
really changes over the first volume, though, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think the point of this volume, I think the actual like intention of it was to get her from evil villain to antihero.
Yeah, and DC are into that at the moment. Like that Superman issue we read, like more recent iterations of Lex Luthor, kind of paint him as more of a grey area figure.
So the past 10 or 20 years, that has been a trend. I think the problem was that in the 90s, and this is pure speculation, please feel free to correct me if you know better. In the 90s, there was a trend of trying to make the heroes more gritty and darker. And that did not receive really well, because when you're trying to turn like Spider-Man into a gritty, dark character, it's like, no, that's not what we like about him.
Local neighborhood Spidey.
And even Batman went too far, and Thor at one point was a biker, and all these weird things they were doing.
A biker?
Yeah, it was weird.
That's not, considering the kind of political allegiances in those biker gangs. Turning a Norse god into a biker is
certainly darker.
Yeah, that's a bit.
I'm pulling at random like images I've seen from the 90s. Yeah, so
socialist.
Yeah,
that's a deep cut.
Maybe why it didn't last that long.
Well, yeah, fucking A.
But so
what would Thor ride?
I don't know, mobike.
Oh, no.
Harley Davidson, probably something like that.
I don't know if the Scandinavians are well known for producing motorcycles.
Yeah, but they're also not known for producing superheroes specifically. So I think once you cross that barrier, you do whatever you want. But. So I think in the noughties, there was then a trend of like, well, what if we take these villains and then see how they do as like more of an anti-hero figure rather than making the superheroes darker. So I think there's countless examples of that. More recently, Dr. Doom had a couple of, like 5 years ago, had a hero run, which I actually really liked. And then they just retconned. They were like, bollocks to this, he's a villain now again.
Was Dr. Doom the one who there was a kid of one of the superheroes that he became friends with because they met on an intellectual level?
Yeah, Fantastic Four's kids.
Yeah, that's like a super interesting concept.
Yeah, and that was why it was such a good hero run, because it was him kind of, everyone was like, he's the most evil guy. Like, we don't believe you doing it. He was actually wearing bloody super Iron Man armor. So he was doing like his own version of Iron Man. So it was a really interesting run.
Tony Stark give him the...
He was in a coma at this point.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So
an alcohol-induced coma.
No, it was a self-induced coma or something. It was
Tony
the result of the Civil. You always come back Civil War 2. We keep coming back to
show.
Stuff that happened afterwards. But so a lot of anti-hero runs. My problem with other anti-hero runs, like the prime example I have is one. Do you know a character called Deathstroke?
Yeah.
So he has had a few of these anti-hero runs because he's a mercenary. So I thought they were like, I think the writers were like, well, we can turn him good if we just, the right person pays him or something.
Yeah, the right clientele.
But there was a prime example I read a while ago, which was basically, and I've seen it in a couple of other instances as well. So they take a villain or a villainous character who typically shoots people with a gun. Like, that's their thing. You can't take that away. You then try and make them good. And what they do, and I've seen this at least twice, 2 examples I can think of, they have them still shooting people, but the bullets are non-lethal, filled with a red gel that incapacitates the person without killing them. So they're trying
America.
So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, which I know is a dumb expression because why would you have cake and not eat it? But they're trying to have it both ways. It's like, look, he's shooting people in the scory. Also, the bullets, this red gel, and they're actually fine. Like, it was like the old A-Team joke about like the baddies getting a van and it flips over and sets on fire and they all crawl out because they're fine. It's like, the A-Team didn't kill anyone. Like, they're fine.
But yeah, Baracus is a good dude.
So the reason I'm mentioning all this is I appreciate that at the start of this, they're not morally whitewashing her. She is still killing people at the start.
She straight up murders 2 dudes in like the first 3 pages.
And I appreciate, again, that they're just completely innocent.
Yeah,
they're
totally.
Like, what are you doing on our land? Like,
and she's just like, well, killing you serves the goal. It's not important to the goal, but it doesn't set it any further back, so why not? And it's that line where she's ruminating on, or that one of them says that, you know, if she killed all the cows, she could just kill him. And then in her internal monologue, she says, I already did. So my first issue with this came on the first page because they did a cardinal sin.
Right. The narration?
Yeah, exposition through narration before there's been any action. You know how I feel about that shit.
Yes. I actually made a note of that because I do feel like it's the crutch or the shortcut of some comic writers to get exposition over in their limited page run.
And we've talked about this. We've talked about superheroes' interior monologues. And there was a Spider-Man comic that we read that did it a lot.
Yep.
I think it was the
One More Day.
Yeah, the multiverse one. And then I want to say Human Target did it a little bit.
Yes, Human Target.
Less egregiously. But in this, as I read through, I came to enjoy her monologue more and more.
It was good writing. It was good to see what was going on in her mind.
I think if she had stayed where she started as a character, if her motivations hadn't changed the way they did throughout the 6 volumes...
6 issues.
6 issues. I would have felt a bit differently about it. But because it's really important to us that we have a sense of her motivations changing, the most expedient way to get that across was with an interior monologue.
Yeah.
So towards the end, I kind of started to see why they did it. But right up front, I saw it, first panel, interior monologue, nothing happening. And I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, he's got me reading another one of these.
Here's where I've got to on this trope since we've started discussing it on here. My thing is, my favorite kind of comic is one that can get across all this exposition without a running dialogue.
Yeah, totally.
In a dialogue. I think that's the best kind. And when something does it, I do have a little bit, like seeing on the first page, I have a little bit of like, oh, okay, we're doing this then. Now where I am, I feel like if the dialogue, if it is contextualized in a way that actually relates to the story.
Yeah.
So this one, it's a letter she's writing, or letters to Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
So if it's that, I'll forgive it a bit more because it's not just random internal dialogue. It is an actual thing that's happening in relation to the story.
And again, it happened in that Supergirl run that I love.
And that was a secondhand writing of the story as well, wasn't it?
It was her sidekick.
Yeah.
It was the person that she was traveling with who was writing her story, and we were seeing her narrative. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting here that we're seeing not just an in medium res interior monologue, but it's almost, I've used this term here before, I'm going to use it again, it's almost epistolary.
Yeah.
There's almost this epistolary element that's running through. And I didn't know about the Harley Quinn thing because I've never read a Poison Ivy comic.
Yeah.
I've never read a Batman comic that has Harley Quinn in it.
Yeah.
My sole understanding of Harley Quinn is from the trailer from the Suicide Squad films.
Right. Yeah.
Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn. I've not seen the Suicide Squad film. I've not seen the Joker film. My sole understanding of her is from trailers of that film. I didn't know her and Poison Ivy were just a thing.
Yeah, they are now, yeah.
How long has that been going on for?
Quite a while. I think as far as I've been reading comics, for sure. So at least 10 years or so. I think what kind of happened was...
Is pre or post Joker?
Definitely post-Joker, yeah.
Post-Joker,
So
right.
what it kind of relates to, that context, is that Harley Quinn broke away from the Joker, maybe in a one specific thing, but it felt like it was just kind of over time. Basically what happened was Harley Quinn became a very popular character. They wanted to turn her good because she was so popular and give her own stories and stuff. Again, she's a bit of an anti-hero, she works with Batman and stuff a lot as well. But the main point was when she broke away from Joker, and they obviously gave it that spin of leaving an abusive ex kind of thing, like that, framing it in that way for the modern, era. Poison Ivy became then her kind of, not necessarily shoulder to cry on, but like an emotional support. And I think fans generally, I think, just shipped them together. And then that influenced the writing and actually made them an actual couple.
Because isn't Harley Quinn's whole stick that she's just really mentally ill and has a baseball bat?
So her thing is she was defined mainly by her relationship to the Joker.
Right, okay.
So her origin was that she was a psychiatrist to the Joker. Like, she was a normal person, and the Joker kind of influenced her. She became like especially her backstory became like not quite Stockholm syndrome, because she was never really captured. She went along willingly from the start, but she was enamored with this larger than life character who the Joker was, and became in love with him. And that kind of led her down this path to becoming a villain with him.
Yeah.
She's obviously done her fair share of evil stuff before, but now they've kind of retconned it into she was going along with it not because she wanted to do evil, but because she just wanted to please the Joker, And the Joker obviously is like meant to be like master manipulator, psychopath kind of person. So he just loved having someone around to bask in his glory and all that. Definitely helped that. I say helped. It helped reframe it later on that he was always like, didn't treat her well.
Yeah.
Like, again, like I said about an abusive ex, like he was like, he didn't care about her. Her only value to him was like a sidekick and someone to like give him praise and that kind of stuff. So I think, again, that's what we contextualize in the modern era, where she again found herself good friends with Poison Ivy, and then I think the fans just shipped them together, and that's where we are now. And I think it's a good representation in this. The other thing I say about the inner dialogue thing, what I like as well, is that it affects the story later on. So as we see at the end, and we're covering the whole 6 issues, I think we're just going to cover it the whole thing. I would say I recommend it. I think it's a really interesting read. So if you want to go read it beforehand and come back, like, I think you should do that. But it contextualizes in the end where the letters go to Harley Quinn, and then that influenced her. She's then on her way to meet Poison Ivy. So
she becomes like a character.
Yes, she appears in it for sure. One thing I want to point out as well, just on the art, kind of relates, is the actual depiction of Poison Ivy in this, like physically. So she has like a quite unique look for this specific series.
Is she not normally ginger?
No, she's always a redhead.
Yeah.
But if you see so there's some flashbacks to when before this series, she's basically wearing what is like her stereotypical getup, which is like a green leotard kind of thing with like the ivy leaves on it, like very over the top, like Batman villain, like you are dressed as the thing that you do.
Yeah.
I like that for this, it changes to black top and the boiler suit that's sometimes up and sometimes rolled down, and the boots, and she says that she's in landscaping whenever anyone asks.
Yeah.
So I like that that's like a very unique look, that if you see her like this, so if you've ever, like for me, having seen her in a lot of stuff before, as soon as I see her like this, I go, oh, this is the Poison Ivy series.
Right.
So it's a very unique take on how she is for this.
Again, I knew nothing about her, and so I didn't know that was a unique character model. But that's really interesting, because totally fits the story, totally fits her kind of backstory for why she is where she is at any given time.
Makes her look like more of a real character for this now.
Yeah, totally.
But by then showing what she used to look like in the flashbacks, it also acknowledges that she was like a stereotypical villain beforehand. I also like, it kind of relates to the art, but also the context, the fungi deaths, especially the ones at the beginning, look horrific.
The botanical stuff is dealt with really well.
And I had the same thought, and I thought, at a minimum, if you're doing a Poison Ivy comic series, that's a bare minimum requirement. Like, you have to do the plant stuff well.
Certainly this one.
Yeah, and it looks great. It reminded me quite a bit of the Last of Us fungi monsters in that, and I think this might have been influenced by that a bit. Maybe not so much the TV show, because that came out a couple of years ago.
Video game.
The video game has been around for quite a while longer, and that's been quite impactful. So, but then also, if you're going to do fungi stuff in any superhero comic, this is the character to do that with.
Yeah, totally. Like, you wouldn't see Catwoman doing it, would you?
No, it'd be weird if you did. Should I also give a quick kind of brief of the story of the comic as well, just for anyone?
Balls deep, but go for it.
Well, I'm more thinking if someone hasn't read it, if they don't intend on reading it, they just want to hear us,
like
a bit of context. So Poison Ivy basically establishes in the first issue that her plan or goal at this point is she's stolen a type of fungi that can infect and kill people, basically. She's controlling it in herself, and her plan is literally to go across America and spread it around the country as much as possible. The idea being that there's some people who she can activate it in immediately. So she can, if someone gets near, it's in their system, and she can telepathically or psychically activate it and kill the person immediately. But for everyone else, it can get in them, and she can activate it like just later on from wherever she is. So the goal is to spread it around America as much as possible, and then at a certain point, it's like D-Day, set
Detonate
it off, kill a lot of people, and then by extension, humanity will kind of fall as the plants will rise, kind of
like
thing.
a form of biological warfare.
Definitely, yeah. And there's a point in it which I thought was very smart, where she literally goes to work in like what's essentially an Amazon like warehouse depository kind of thing.
If you were going to try and get stuff as far as you could,
exactly. As soon as she starts doing that, I had the reaction of, oh, that's very smart. Like that works perfectly for what's going on here. I do like in terms of her motivations. So again, this starts off with her pretty sinister goals in terms of killing a bunch of people, like to the level of genocide. So the fact that we see her almost start to wrestle with the motivations, I thought was very good character arc. She starts off just being like, this is what I'm doing. And also, especially, it kind of helps with the motivations that there's two main things I think were very intentionally written in. One is the people who die from it don't suffer. Yeah. And I think that was a very intentional point to write in, because it softens the blow a little bit.
And that's established, like, right off the bat in issue 1. She kills all that livestock and says, yeah, but they suffered less than if you killed them for meat. She didn't say that. That's not verbatim. Yeah, but that's the sentiment there, isn't it?
And especially that not only do they not suffer, they actually experience a kind of bliss before they die.
Gloria, yeah.
So I think that was very intentional. And the other point is, and it's kind of revealed at the end of the first issue, is that the fungi, she's not just carrying it, she is infected by it.
Yeah.
She's fighting it off with her healing ability, so that's how she's able to kind of keep going and keep spreading it. But also she's acknowledged that because it's in her, she will die.
Has she always had a healing factor?
I think in the sense that most characters in DC, and by extension Marvel, if they've got any kind of powers, they always come with a healing factor as well.
Well, because I've not encountered that many villains that have a healing factor. That's normally like a hero thing, not a villain thing.
So I think there's quite a few villains that do, because it makes the fights more difficult, and it gives like
maybe
the fight a bit more bite, because they have to fight past this. Like they can resist normal injuries, and you have to really make sure they're dead or
slashing or bludgeoning damage.
Well, unless you're Wolverine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a plant thing. I think you could just very easily say, her body is like pretty altered through plant stuff. So she's got accelerated plant healing or something. But I think the fact that it's established she's going to die, for one thing, is a trope that I do think we see quite a bit.
The target.
But it's always effective. It's always effective if you pay it off. So if you tell me at the beginning of something a character's and this is outside superhero, it's just across all fiction. If you tell me a character's going to die, I'm immediately hooked. Like it's a simple thing but effective tool.
Yeah.
But if you don't pay it off, I will then feel tricked. Like,
and they're not paying it off here, are they?
Not
really.
Not in this. I have read Pass Forward, and they are continuing it.
Surely killing your protagonist is a really effective way of ending a series.
And yeah, I mean that it has to end at some point. Like as we know, every superhero series gets retcon at some point, or they do a big crossover and reboot everything.
Yeah.
So they've got that in the pocket for when they do. What I will say is, reading past it, not to get too far ahead, but that it does continue to influence the story.
Did this Poison Ivy ever re-enter Batman's Rogue Gallery?
I mean, it's hard to say because it's so recently. This is what she is doing this right now. So she hasn't.
Yeah. So, but has she crossed over with Batman yet?
Batman does appear. There is part of it. Literally just recently, so like the past couple months is when Batman's kind of been involved a bit more.
Because we kind of see Batman.
Yes, we do. And I think that's a good point to get on. So she is hallucinating because she's infected by this fungi. So you get a lot of exposition through the hallucinations.
She has her own special word for it. Subconscious Batman.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting for one reason, because the other kind of big recent DC that we read, I think even from the same year.
2022?
Yeah, Human Target.
Yeah, around that time, yeah. had another instance of that.
Yeah, Batman appearing not as a character, but as like a vision or an anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting thing that DC were clearly into at the time, which is how can we weave Batman in without actually showing him?
Or having to write him as a character.
Yeah,
if he's doing other stuff. And I think like Human Target is one example. I think this is the other. Like they're just interesting ways.
We just happen to see both examples.
I would be shocked if others haven't done something similar. Yeah. I think it just speaks to how big a character Batman is.
Hey, for that one commenter, we need to be factually accurate.
They'll correct us if not.
Absolutely.
Or just call us gay. Either way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm cool with both.
Yeah, both are fine. So the Batman hallucination is especially interesting to me because it's at a point where she's about to kind of face off against like the villain of this first volume, who turns out to be a guy who was the scientist who experimented on her and gave her the powers.
Yeah.
So she's kind of going into this like, I have to face this guy, and he turns out he's the guy who she stole the fungi from, so it kind of loops back into the whole premise. And as she's about to go into it, she's hallucinating a lot to an almost uncontrollable degree.
Yeah.
And those hallucinations kind of then manifest into a singular hallucinating Batman in her perception. I think what I enjoyed so much about this is that this Batman from her own psyche appears as almost like advice and guiding her on how to face this villain.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting. I did a bit of, what's it called, where you kind of read into it a bit extra, or you add your own kind of headcanon. Yeah. My thing was, and I think headcanon like this is okay when you're kind of filling in blanks, not plot holes, but just little blanks.
You know how I feel about that stuff.
But like when there are spaces you can add your own stuff, but it doesn't take away if you don't. Do you know what I mean? Like that you've got the space where you can add your own stuff.
I do know what you mean, but I disagree.
That's fair. I like it when, again, I feel like it's interacting with the story a lot more because you're adding your own stuff to it, but you don't have to. You're not required of it to make it good. So for this, what I imagined was the reason that she was imagining Batman is because Batman is the person who has thwarted all her previous plans because she's not been successful. And now that she is facing against her own version of what she has been to Batman, her psyche has gone, well, who's the best person we know to handle this situation?
See, I chose to view that a bit differently.
Go on.
So there's a lot of instances in comic books where somebody's consciousness ends up in somebody else's body.
Yep, 100%.
And so if Batman's consciousness was in her body, this would make sense. It feels like they wanted to use that trope without actually using it. And so, because this is the thing, what we have to get into, if she's not actually got a little Batman existing in her consciousness, it's her imagining what Batman would do, but it's all coming from her consciousness.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a little bit like, it just doesn't make a whole lick of sense. I liked Subconscious Batman. I liked it, but it just didn't make a lot of sense for me because I wasn't... And I know we get into suspension of disbelief all the time because it's like you can suspend your disbelief for a person who can like infect people with a random like mushroom-based disease.
Yep.
Like a weird fungal plague that she's creating.
Athlete's foot, yep.
She's giving people lethal thrush.
Yep.
But you can't then suspend your disbelief for her having a fully functioning autonomous Batman in her consciousness.
I think where you're getting at is the difference between the feeling of whether something feels contrived or not.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Because if it's part of the existing suspension of disbelief, then it's part and parcel of what you're already reading. But if then something kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere, then it feels contrived. I feel the contrivance a bit more when she's talking to a character who just happens to start talking about or doing stuff with plants. And on the one hand, the way I kind of look at it is, on the one hand, what are the odds she would run into someone who's doing this?
Right.
But on the other hand, I also think, how long a timeline are we actually seeing? And is the story just picking out the points where she's inevitably ran into people doing that kind of stuff?
And she's also mooching through Middle America. I imagine Middle America has a lot of agricultural activity.
Exactly, yes. And that's what I mean. You kind of swing. It's just where you feel. Like, it's where you just fall personally. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Should we research that for that one guy? Just in case.
What, agricultural stuff?
Yeah, just, How much agriculture is there in Middle America,
I think we
Jamie?
can safely say a lot.
Well,
Like,
I don't know. This is the problem. I don't know. And assumptions are no longer safe on this podcast.
I'm putting my eggs in the basket of there's a lot of agriculture in America.
Did you use that aphorism knowingly?
Well, eggs in the basket. Yeah, it's agriculture.
Pretty agricultural,
I'm putting
isn't
all
it?
my seeds in this one plant. Safe bet.
All right, Johnny.
But so,
Appleseed.
with regards to the Batman thing, again, I come across in the way of like, and I think they mention this. I think she says it where she says, "Who knows you better than your enemies?"
Yeah.
And I think that's why she has a Batman in her head, because who else has she been interacting with other than obviously more recently Harley Quinn?
Yeah.
But beyond that, who else has she known and interacted with more than Batman? So if anyone's going to kind of manifest in her psyche, that's why I enjoyed it more, I think, than you did.
Yeah. Well, I didn't dislike it. I just struggled to suspend my disbelief for it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But yeah, it was an interesting part, I thought,
Yeah,
at the very
totally.
least. But like you mentioned earlier, with regards to the topics that are kind of being brought in, like especially you said the kind of ecological topics,
Yeah.
they do handle them a little bit heavy-handed for me at points.
Do you know who she reminds me of in the popular culture?
Hmm.
And I want you to guess.
Fictional or non-fictional?
Non-fictional pop cultural figure?
David Attenborough.
No.
Okay.
He said some shit like this. Little bit more divisive. Probably a better singer.
Trying to think of one of those. What, Bono?
Please let me get what I want, because it would be the first time.
Right.
Morrissey!
Okay. I don't know enough about Morrissey. I don't listen to him or anything.
Oh, shit.
I know he's been decisive and controversial.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who knows anything about Morrissey will know what I'm hinting at here. It's like that idea that, like, humanity is a plague and our natural world is more important than humanity.
Yeah. And to be fair, that's been a running thing, definitely in more recent years. Two prime examples I think of is Bill Hicks used to have a bit about that. That might be a bit more
That's
niche.
not that recent. He's been dead a while.
No, it's a bit more niche thing. But mainly I was thinking of the bit from The Matrix, the bit with Agent Smith, where he literally describes humanity as a virus. And he's talking more about computer viruses. But I think it extends to, plagues on Earth and stuff like that.
The Matrix is one of those that's so open-ended you can do any kind of reading you want from it.
I mean, it has a lot of open-ended questions, I think is the best way to describe.
It holds up to quite a lot of different readings as The Matrix. It's quite an interesting one.
I mean, The Matrix, is why it was like the most popular film when it came out, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, yeah, fucking hell.
But again, this title, it does speak to the similar things of like humanity as a whole and like their place in the world and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like she specifically makes reference to a question I think a lot of comic fans have had about her, which is whether Poison Ivy is vegetarian or not. So I think it kind of comes from a jokey way.
Question?
I think it kind of comes in a kind of jokey way, because I think the joke was, it was like, well, she loves plants, so is she then purely carnivore? Like,
we don't do we see her eat?
well, they address that specifically, which I think was a good thing to do with this character.
Wait, do they?
Yeah, because she's eating in the diner, and she says she raises that point. She said people wonder if I'm a vegetarian, which I think is a stupid question, because her thing is, it's never been, well, the old stereotype.
I didn't clock that, mate.
So the old stereotype version of her would probably have been like a don't eat plants, eat animals instead, because plants are better.
Yeah.
But this one, I think, is a lot more grounded version, where she says, obviously I eat like everything, but everything that everyone else does, because it's not about what you eat, it's about maintaining the balance of the natural world.
Yeah.
And even she makes the point of like, even deer need to be kept under control by the wolves, like their population, like that's the cycle.
Do you know I must have just read right past that?
Possibly. It was the point where she was at the time, it was only like for a page, like one page, literally.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I'm with you.
And like I said, she makes the point of just, she actually goes into more detail about vegetarian stuff and how they're grown. And I think she's addressing probably not a misconception, but she says like, just because it's vegetarian doesn't mean it's healthy for the environment to grow. And she talks about specifically how these like agave, I think she mentions, how that harms the environment because of how quickly and efficiently they need to produce it and all that
and
kind of stuff.
Avocados and all that jazz.
Exactly. So her thing is, she's not just vegetarian, she's not just carnivore because she doesn't eat plants, it's, the larger debate about how healthy things are generally.
I'm pretty sure there's issues with waste from the almond industry as well.
Yeah, almonds are a big thing as well. Yeah, all I've heard.
Yeah, because
we are not the best people to ask about this.
Yeah, because there's a lot of, because obviously we don't a lot of the almonds that get harvested now don't get harvested to be sold as and consumed as almonds. They get made into milks, and so there's a bunch of byproducts, isn't there? I think that's the issue.
I've heard something. We might be wrong, but I've heard similar things. So
again,
write in if you know.
Yeah, if you know, send us a YouTube comment.
Yeah,
calling us gay.
Yes, we only look at him if you call us gay.
Do you know now when somebody calls something gay? I've watched so much Community recently. I just picture Chevy Chase.
No, it was I can't remember his name, but the character was Chang.
No, Chevy Chase.
Oh, sorry. Chevy Chase does say a lot. I'm thinking of the meme. There was Chang when he was at the back of the classroom, and he's the teacher. He's at the back of the classroom. He just says, "Ha, gay."
Oh yeah, that's like season 1. That's like early Community, isn't it?
And again, that's such a thing of like, obviously using gay in a derogatory term is fucking awful now. Yeah. We all know this, but he says it so hilariously that you can't help but just have it in your head, just go, "Ha, gay."
I'm amazed that, you know, the episode where they convince Piers that his 6th level robes have come, and they've got him in a wizard outfit with a cookie on a stick, and he thinks he's psychic for an episode, and he stands behind Jeff.
Definitely not a Scientology reference. Go on.
Definitely not a Scientology reference. He stands behind Jeff and he puts his hands on and he's like, "Oh, gay, so much gay."
Yeah.
I'm amazed that hasn't been gift yet.
Yeah. Well, again, I think what is his name? He's the actor. Oh, damn, I'm going to look that up. So his name is Ken Jeong.
I was so close.
You were pretty close, yes. But yeah, Ken Jeong, when he says it, that's what I always think of. So going back to the relationship in this, because we talked a lot about the origins of the Poison Ivy Harley Quinn relationship. I do really like the argument that they kind of set up for before this starts.
Yeah.
So here's the thing that I was kind of interested to get your take on. I did not know what happened in this before this comic, and you're kind of told it as the story goes.
Right.
The story being, and again, I didn't know this, I inferred this from everything that happened here, just before this started, Poison Ivy was in some storyline where she gained like godlike powers over plants and stuff.
She talks about the loss of her power a lot, doesn't she? And how Harley helped take it away. Is that actually a thing? Like,
I mean, I assume so. I just assume based on the fact it happened in a previous comic before this one.
Right, okay.
So that I like that they're explaining that, but not in a heavy-handed way. They didn't just go, for readers who don't know, in this past series this happened. Like, they kind of tell you it through the dialogue and through the narrative. But the actual argument between her and Harley, I thought was really good, because it basically explains in the argument in the flashback that Poison Ivy had all this power, but she wasn't going to sustain it. And Harley Quinn, I assume with the Bat family probably, basically stopped her power to save her life.
The Bat family,
yeah.
There's a bunch of references to it.
Yes.
Never really understood what they're on about. I'm assuming they mean Batman.
Yeah, Batman and the people he works with / his family, because he's adopted a bunch of Robins and all that.
Right. Okay.
It's let's say nomenclature for just Bat family. Like the
Is this a thing in DC?
Yeah.
The Bat family?
They address it, yeah.
But they're not the Batmans.
I mean, their surname's not Batman, if that's what you mean.
But they're the Bat family. Why are they not the Batmans?
Because they're a bunch of it, because all the Robins are adopted.
Does he actually adopt them?
Yeah, adopts them in the kind of legal guardian kind of way.
Dude, I mean, he's just a rich guy living in a failing city, adopting a fucking vigilante troop of
child soldiers.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And we still think of him as a hero.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wild.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, he's adopting the ones that are themselves normally orphans as well, so.
Yeah, but I feel like Bruce Wayne.
Yep.
Bruce Wayne,
yeah.
I always get him mixed up with the Hulk. I feel like Bruce Wayne had a lot of advantages as an orphan.
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly, yes.
Mucho privilege going on there.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, he's not your standard.
That's part of the character, is how he's not your standard orphan. One could argue.
I thought that was a pretty original thought, and you've just trampled all over it. They're my leg. Yes, JB.
We all know.
Well done. We all know that Bruce Wayne is rich.
I think Bruce Wayne might have some financial advantages to...
See, he paid for dinner. Fucking hell, mate.
He bought the bloody restaurant. So, but saying about the argument, I thought that felt like a real, like, they actually had a disagreement.
Yeah.
And obviously Harley was in the right because the whole point is she saved Poison Ivy's life because she loves her. But I also can understand Poison Ivy's point of view of it's not logical, but I can understand her feeling of like, I was a god, I had everything and you took it away. I know you were trying to save my life. And the specific wording she uses, she says like, Harley says, I was trying to save you. And Poison Ivy said, you were trying to save the parts of me that were useless.
I mean, I would imagine that if you made Jeff Bezos live in a council flat in Scunthorpe, he'd kill himself within the week.
Yes, but the difference is Poison Ivy only had these godlike powers for a short time.
Yeah, I mean, he has been an emperor of the universe for a hot minute now, hasn't he?
Yeah, or one of them. Illuminati and all that bollocks.
Triangles.
I just felt like it was a very understanding reason. It wasn't... There's a habit of like contriving reasons like, why aren't you normally with the person you're normally with? It's like, we had an argument, and then it's like, oh, what was the argument? It turns out to be bollocks. But this felt like a really genuine, like, emotional thing. And even at the point where we were addressing it, Poison Ivy's like, I was wrong. Like, from the start, she's like, I know where you're coming from. I was wrong. I was emotional. But I have to do this thing now, regardless. So... yeah, I thought that was a great way to start it. Speaking of Batman...
I like the relationship between the two of them as well.
Yeah, it's a great relationship. And you get a lot more of it and a lot better of it as the series goes on.
Harley Quinn seemed a lot more sane than I was expecting.
Well, I was going to make a point about this. So there's 2 points I've actually got with regards to the facial expressions, right? One is, so there's a point where Poison Ivy, she has just kind of saved the day in a little bit in one of these issues, which actually, it's a hard pivot into antihero.
Yeah, totally.
She's working the Amazon place, and there's a shitty boss there who's also basically sexually harassing one of the women who works there. And Poison Ivy, definitely the antihero of like infects him with the fungi. It's like, right, I'm going to command you to confess to sexual harassment, and then you're going to die. And then she goes back to the work people. It's like, yeah, I've all fixed it now. It's fine. They're like, cool. Like, don't look in his office because there's a fucking mushroom corpse in there. But I've fixed it.
She loves to keep them because she has mushroom corpses piling up in the back of that van, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's just riding along with them.
She just chills with them.
Yeah. But so she saves the day there. And then the woman who basically she's saved in this isolated way kisses her. And they go back to her hotel room. And in that moment, you have... yes. And then in that moment, you have Harley Quinn, like a hallucination of her, watching from the corner. The point of it. And Harley is just watching, blankly smiling. And the reason I made note of it was her face there, I thought, was quite blank and expressionless.
Yeah.
But, and this is why I acknowledge the jank, but I don't think it was as I think the art was still good overall. Yeah. I think her blank expression there was intentional. She was just a hollow hallucination.
Hence why I didn't show you a photograph of it.
Yeah, so you picked up on it as well, yeah. But I thought that was a nice little detail that could be misconstrued as bad art.
In fairness, Ivy and Harley Quinn were both pretty well drawn throughout. I mean, it's so interesting because once you read the sample size of comic books that we have, and we've read a pretty notable sample size of the stuff that's kind of been out for the past like 5 or 10 years doing this podcast.
Yeah,
you do start to realize that, and I probably should have realized this before, but most artists have their strengths and the things they're good at. This artist was better at drawing women's faces this artist was better at drawing traditionally femme faces than traditionally mask faces.
And I would say as well, we've always got knowledge with artists that a lot of them are being crunched to get this stuff out as quickly as possible.
It's not a fun job, is it?
No, and so whenever they do a good job, I think it's even more impressive.
Yeah, totally.
The other facial expression, which I really liked, and this is coming back to when you brought up Batman, there's a moment where she's going to the camper van and she hears something and she immediately spins around on the spot and goes, oh my God, is it him? Is it Batman? And her face in that, it's a kind of close up of her face as it just says Batman in the narration. And the face really looks scared, shocked, like ready to like fight or flight kind of thing. I thought they did a really good job of getting that face expression. Admittedly, again, they had a close-up panel, so they had a bit more to work with, but I still thought it was a really good job.
Yeah, no, totally. This idea of Batman just appearing out of nowhere is fantastic. I mean, I get that it's his thing because he's Batman.
Yeah, and that's the air of the character that you want to get across in things like this. I think the best job of it was in Human Target.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of using all of your other properties to create a mythos about one of your main selling properties is really interesting. And I suppose it's something that could only come out of one of the big two.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, you couldn't do that in another publishing house that didn't have this huge interconnected universe, could you?
No. And it's the pros and cons of the big universe. Like,
yeah, totally. Like, we're seeing all these like secondary characters, or in this case a spin-off character, who we're you know, they're using the mythos of Batman to really great effect as an antagonist that doesn't even need to show up. You don't even need to draw the fucker. People just need to, like, people are scared of him.
Just the name alone, and you know exactly what the reference is, what's going on. So yeah, definitely a good use of the character before they even had the hallucination Batman in.
Even as a dirty casual like me.
Exactly. And again, I think that's what helps with these kind of crossovers. Like, there's titles like these, they go, we need to put someone big in, so, you know, if someone casual's picked up, that they know someone they recognize.
Who we're dealing with, yeah.
I thought this did a good job of like, well, she's a Batman villain, let's get Batman in for a bit. We can't put him in properly yet. Let's do this kind of stuff, and that's a good kind of compromise.
How are we feeling about the dialogue writing?
I thought the dialogue was pretty good overall.
Yeah, me too.
I thought there's a little bit of there's some little cliched bits,
totally.
but like for a big two comic, like I thought it was better than most.
I mean, in fairness, we read a comic by one of this generation's best fantasy writers, arguably, and you had issues with the little kind of cliched, jokey bits there, and then we're reading something by, it would appear like an established but still up and coming DC staff writer.
I definitely call it, definitely established by now. Not necessarily just DC, but of a comic writer for sure.
Where actually we're seeing some pretty solid dialogue, pretty believable, pretty strong dialogue. Like,
there's a line that I took note of, which I thought was really good, as like an encompassing line of getting across a lot of subtext.
Yeah.
It was when she's talking to these people in the diner. So this is the kind of journey where from issue 1, she's like, I'm killing a bunch of people, just needs to be done, and I'm going to die as well. So it's not selfish. Like, that's her self-reasoning. And then as we go on, she starts to question this goal. She's talking to these people in the diner. They're all very nice and like very just nice people who she's kind of rationalizing, do they deserve to die kind of thing. And the line that I made note of, which I thought was so good, was she's wondering the ethics of it. And she says, it's too early to make exceptions.
Yeah. I remember that one.
As a one-off line, I thought that's such a economic use of words.
Yeah.
Because it gets across how she feels about the goals that she has and her plans. And it gets across that she has doubts, but because of where she started, she cannot deviate from this. The plan is in motion. It's too late now, but it's her own plan she's set. So on the one hand, she feels compelled to continue, but it's her setting the compulsion.
Part of me wondered, and again, there's not a whole lot of textual evidence to this, but it kind of makes sense, is that actually, well, it would have been interesting if it was actually the virus, like the fungus itself making her do these things.
Yeah, that could be a plot point for sure. Like, that would be a smart way to go if they do that. They haven't done that yet, as I've read, but it's still ongoing.
But again, like, her motivations change so profoundly.
Yeah, and I think in a way that makes sense. Like,
yeah, totally.
Because when you think about her previous life up until this point as just a Batman villain in Gotham and just constantly committing crimes and terrorist acts, essentially, this is potentially the first time she's had as close to a normal life as possible and normal interactions with people. So it's fair to think, like, you could consider it contrived in the sense of like, oh, she's spoken to people and now she's turned good. But I think this is really like the first instance in her life where she's had genuine conversations with normal people, like for a long time. I
imagine a genuine conversation with one of the scores of people that you're trying to murder might change your motivations.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
And the fact that she's trying to remind herself, like, no, we have this plan, let's keep going kind of thing. I thought, again, this is why I kind of picked this topic. I thought at the very least this would be an interesting topic to discuss, is the character arc from villain to antihero. Because again, I've read others and they just start from an antihero from the start. And it's just like, who is this character now? Like, this isn't who we know.
We just see a brand new representation of a character straight away from that standpoint, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because you don't see them getting there.
Yeah,
It's almost an inverse villain origin story, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's more common these days, and a good execution of it, I think, is more popular these days.
Yeah, I think there's more kind of room for grey areas in our villains now, isn't there?
Another great one I've mentioned before, an example from another character is when Doc Ock became Spider-Man, because that was actually called the superior Spider-Man, because his whole thing was, even though morally he had changed, he'd grown and changed and become essentially good, he still had his characteristics of like, but I'm going to be the best Spider-Man because I'm the smartest person who's ever lived, and I'm going to do it way better than Peter Parker ever did. Even though he's like, Peter Parker's actually a really good guy, and I'm sad that I killed him. But he's like, but I'm going to be the better Spider-Man. You know? So I like that they still incorporate the actual core characteristics while changing the moral alignment.
Yeah, I hear that.
There's a part I want to get into now. I think we're near the end of talking about this, so I actually saved this part for the end for a reason you'll see.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the kind of the final parts with the big bad, the antagonist, called the Green Man, Doctor something. I can't remember the guy's name.
So just very quickly for reference, do you know about the Green Man?
I did not know, and he might have appeared before. He might not. I don't know. I knew that there's a lot of iterations where she was, again, experimented on by someone, but I didn't know how common occurrence that character was.
Do you know about the Green Man in pagan mythology?
I don't, but so I know Green Man in DC Comics, there's a character, Swamp Thing, who big
Alan Moore,
yes.
Yeah.
But I think he's kind of a version of that for the DC universe.
So the Green Man is a figure in pagan mythology that I don't know a whole lot about, unfortunately. And I probably should have done a bit of research, but I have an effigy of him on one of my doors. So the Green Man is a kind of almost like a Santa kind of figure. A real pagan would get really upset with me here, so please forgive me. But you create pottery plaques of him. And it's kind of like a big bearded man with some like botanical elements going on.
Right.
And you hang it on your door as kind of a blessing for your home. And so it's like they're clearly riffing on that here. Like clearly they're riffing on that here. And it's meant to be like a good luck blessing, and it wards off evil spirits, protects your home. Again, I have one hanging on one of my doors. And so it kind of struck me when they did that. I was like, oh, it's just another one of those little moments where one of the big two is riffing off of something mythological or religious for their iconography.
I think just using any kind of existing, because it's probably one of those things that transcends cultures. Like there's always been like the figure of nature in the woods kind of thing.
Exactly.
And we have more of like Mother Earth, which is more poison ivy. She's more of a riff on that. But yeah, I think it's a more common thing. If it wasn't directly from the pagan thing, it probably is like indirectly influenced by, at the very least.
Again, the Earth Mother trope, that's a big thing in the Polynesian mythology. I think that might even be where we get the concept from.
Possibly.
It's weird how like certain religious ideas or iconographies will find their way into the popular culture and become so far removed from their original religious roots that most people talk about them and don't understand it.
I think the reason is with these superhero universes, because they're trying to make so many different characters, I think inevitably you will find...
Oh, I just meant on a cultural level. Like the concept of Gaia, the Earth Mother, and like Earth Mothers in general, that pops up in Greek mythology and the Polynesian mythology. And it's just become a construct that we use all the time in popular speech, Mother Earth. Or the other big one that I had in my head up until is karma.
Right.
The concept of karma is like a really intrinsic Hindu belief.
Right.
And it's been extracted so much from its roots that now when people talk about karma, I think they use it in this really negative sense.
Was roots a pun? I'll give you a ding for that.
Thank you. Where somebody will say, oh, something bad, somebody does something bad to them, they go, oh, well, karma goes around and comes around. You're like, that's not actually the concept, but cool, go for it.
I was saying with superheroes, I think it was more like a microcosm example of how things filter into like pop culture and stuff. The bit I was about to get into was I'll explain it basically now. The part at the end with the facing the antagonist and the Green Man character and everything, there is an element of, and we'll get into it in a little more, there's an element of like abusive X kind of thing. So So I get into that a little more.
Trigger warning, fucking hell.
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying it now. I think for a few minutes, I'll put the time codes in the description, or I'll even set like a timer for 5 minutes or something, and we'll just quickly go through it. But basically just wanted to get into the metaphors, as it were, but it relates to abuse and stuff.
Yeah.
So if you want to skip that part, we're doing 5 minutes from now. I will say now, just skip ahead 5 minutes. We'll be done talking about it. So here we go. So the reason I'm bringing it up is because this part of the story seems to be addressing the character who basically abused her in a way against her will that it affected her life going forward. So it's kind of a PTSD thing. And the reason I want to bring this up is it because it's a female character that feels like a compulsion with a lot of writers to do? Now, I understand, obviously, this is written by a female writer, so I'm not putting on this individual writer, but I'm saying as a larger thing in pop culture, you do find a lot of female characters having to overcome the male character who previously abused them, you know?
Yeah, and we've talked about this in a few different contexts up and down the time we've done this podcast, haven't we? We've talked about sexual violence as a narrative device and how we don't really feel particularly good about that.
At least in this instance, she is overcoming and defeating the guy.
I mean, I think what's interesting here is that we're seeing something that could be read that way and not a very direct and overt representation thereof.
Yep. It's a superhero shenanigans metaphor for that kind of thing.
And that's the charm of metaphors, is that you can, you choose which metaphors you see, don't you?
Yeah. My point was more that, again, because it's a female character, does that feel like, oh, this trope again? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't get that sense as much.
I think I was getting it because she was literally experimented on by this guy, and that felt like the strong metaphor for that.
No, 100%. Now we're talking about it, I hear it.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about it, I can see what you're driving at.
And the fact that not only did she defeat the guy in the end, but at one point she used the fungus mutates in him, and then he takes control of it. So at one point she can't move, and he's controlling her body. So that for me made it even more explicit. And what he's making her hold a knife to her throat, and then luckily the hallucination Batman kind of gives her advice that helps her rework the situation and come out on top. No,
now that you say it, I think that loss of bodily autonomy is really galling, isn't it?
Yes. And again, the discussion I want to have when we've only got 2 minutes and 40 seconds left to discuss it, I want to get into how, again, this is just used so commonly in female characters. And like a best example I can think of is Jessica Jones with her antagonist, the Purple Man.
I'm not familiar with it.
So his power is he literally controls people. Like he speaks, and she falls under his power and is basically a slave to him for a certain time. But they do, that was like quite a few years ago, so it wasn't as overused a trope at that point.
Right, okay.
And like when it was back then, it felt a bit fresher, but now it just feels like an overused trope. And that's what I kind of felt while reading this. Even though I still enjoyed the writing, I was like, oh, are we doing this again kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? It's interesting. I mean, this happens all the time when we do this, because we don't really talk about the comic before we get into it, is that one of us will clock something the other doesn't, and one of us will read something into something that the other doesn't. And I think this is one of those instances. And now that we're here talking about it, I see it. I'm right there with you. I see it. And it's difficult because these are topics that you don't really want to talk about.
Exactly. And
or think about.
Yeah. And this is exactly why I did the trigger warning thing. It's like, because someone might just not want to have to deal with this, like this topic. So fair enough. But yeah, I thought it was important to mention. I thought it was interesting at the end that she defeats the enemy and this guy, and then so in the superhero shenanigans of it, her healing factor is not doing enough to save her from the damage she's gone through. So she literally eats the corpse of the guy. She's eating the fungus that he's made of, and she's ingesting more of this fungus to rebuild herself.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of metaphor there of internal, like, dealing with and processing the trauma maybe, or something like that?
I mean, maybe. Like, it's one of those things that you can read into it what you will, can't you?
I should also say as well, we are not the best equiped to talk about it. I felt like it would be kind of ignoring something if we didn't.
Yeah, no, and I fully hear that, and I suppose there are those, undertones of like a rebirth almost.
Yes, yeah, a processing and a larval stage or whatever. 15 seconds. So,
I mean, she's quite literally processing, isn't she?
Yes, exactly. So we've addressed it. It's if you listen to this part, then hopefully we just addressed it enough that it's a theme that came up.
And delicately enough.
Yes, we hope so. 3, 2, 1.
Well, that was an awful time, Ryan.
Oh, my timer went off, so that's great as well.
That was a horrible time to be me.
Wasn't fun, but I saved it till the end. I thought it was just the last little bit to address, and I think that's pretty much everything covered in the comic. To be honest, I think there's a lot we didn't cover, but that did speak to. It was quite a dense read for 6 issues of a comic, especially a big 2 superhero comic. I think there was a lot more here to digest that we didn't have time for.
Yeah.
But again, I think if you've listened this far and you haven't read it, I hope that kind of gives you a more of a reason to actually give it a try yourself.
You'll totally be seeing things that we didn't talk about.
Exactly, yes. So that's Poison Ivy 2022, done and dusted.
So, under our new 2024 scaling system, where would you say it is?
That's an interesting one. It's an interesting one because there's definitely goated elements of it, I would say. I think overall it's somewhat held back a bit by the limitations of it being a big 2 ongoing series.
Yeah.
I said this right up top, so I'm going to bookend it with it again. This was originally meant to be a limited miniseries. I think it would have been better and maybe even goated status if it had
remained
been
as such.
Yes. The fact is I've read past it and I think there is a bit of, not a huge criticism, there's a bit of wheel spinning that's gone on after where they're making new stories to continue it and keep going.
Okay, yeah.
I think these first 6, compared to the rest that I've read, these first 6 are the kind of the tightest, most condensed story, the
makes sense,
most focused subplot within this ongoing series.
So it becomes a lot less focused, but it makes sense that it would.
Yeah. And again, so if it was a miniseries, I think go it. I think right now I'd go strong based, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say it's based.
Yeah. So, yeah. Do you want to take us home?
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you had a wonderful time. Really appreciate all of you going into 2024. It's been a magical ride for both of us. That sounds really condescending.
We genuinely appreciate you.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to do, because I've been leaning back for a while, so You're
going to go in power stance.
I'm going to start this again. Thank you for listening. It's been a wonderful time.
Speaks to voiceover work, you have to do the physical stuff when you're doing voiceover.
I wouldn't know. If you'd like to leave us a review, you can do so wherever you get your podcast. Just please make it 5 stars. That would be fantastic. If you want to send us an email, comicliterate@gmail.com. You'd like to point out any historical or biological inaccuracies in the content you've just heard, leave us a YouTube comment, call us gay, tell us how we're wrong. We will read it out.
Call us any sexual orientation. I think it'd be interesting to spice up a bit. Throw some other ones in
be
there,
inclusive.
You know?
Be inclusive. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Goodbye.